Good morning. I'm Crystal Mulry, and I'm a project manager at the Minnesota Historical Society. With me are some of our members of our web team. We have Meleck Davis and Cassie Potter, who are our web designers, and we have Morgan Largent, who's one of our web developers. We're talking about our new calendar, which we launched in June. Our old calendar worked well for more than a decade, but it was showing its age. More importantly, we were facing a strict deadline because Microsoft was going to end its support for the server where the old calendar lived. So we needed to move it or lose it, and we took that opportunity to make some functionality and design improvements at the same time. Our first step was to meet with other people on our staff to hear what people needed and wanted from a calendar. We talked to our historic sites staff because they're the ones who create the programs. We partnered with our marketing team because they manage the calendar content. And we talked with our customer service staff to find out what they're hearing from our visitors. We summarized all of those findings, and we came up with a list of key issues and goals for this project. Our different internal teams sometimes have different ideas about how to address issues, but we were lucky to not have many major disagreements on this project. That may have been because we made sure that everyone was aware of the goals before we started. We shared our progress multiple times along the way, and we got further input multiple times before launch, so nothing was a surprise to anyone. Our challenge was to create one calendar to serve the entire Minnesota Historical Society. Our organization has 26 different locations around the state that all needed to be represented in this one calendar. We also have events that are held at other locations off-site. There were a number of other requirements, such as the ability to have repeating events, also the ability to have images on events. That was something that our old calendar couldn't handle. We also needed to have a design that meets accessibility requirements, and this being 2015, the design needed to be responsive.
Musical speaker chairs up here. So the old design didn't match the look of the new part of our website, and it didn't have images. It was not apparent, how to link to an individual event, and the filters were hidden in an advanced search section, and there are too many of them. So we gutted our interface, and we took it to the studs, and started the design process with a wireframe. The wireframe allowed us to focus on our list of requirements and the functions of the various components without distracting our stakeholders and partners with design elements. It's pretty hard to argue with black and white. So having buy-in on the wireframes and working with established brand elements minimized the surprises when we presented the design. So now we have a main calendar with filters, date, keyword, category locations, and teasers that link to full details. We have additional imagery as well, such as event thumbnails to make it more visual. We also allowed room for marketing campaigns to promote events by tags, exhibits, and locations. And our side menu was replaced by calendar filters. We also found a flexible and responsive slideshow that would accommodate big, vibrant images, and if there was more than one, it automatically converted to a gallery. We added the capacity for video, and we also called out important details in a box. Additional dates and related events were also attached in the footer. Ladies and gentlemen, Cassie Potter.
I'm going to continue on the design considerations of this project. We've also had to consider other various displays adhering to institutional branding, such as the Minnesota Historical Society's homepage, where we have a calendar presence, and as well as the MNHS.org visit page within the main MNHS.org site, as well as incorporating site-specific brand elements into historic sites calendar instances like the Minnesota History Center calendar. We have them throughout various historic sites, historic Fort Snelling and Mill City, and other museums. We also needed to take into consideration tag groups of events like the MNHS Press, which will live within its own section in the future. One of the requirements was to have a mobile version of our event calendar. We wanted to present the same content but in a mobile-friendly environment. We opted for a responsive site with collapsed filters on the calendar homepage, removed the event image thumbnails, and then the promotional blocks were moved to the bottom of the listing to maximize space for the events, which were a priority. On the individual event pages, images are smaller, but still a gallery that utilizes the swipe capability of devices. Event title is priority, below the image with details and then description. And here's Morgan.
Hi, I'm going to talk a bit about the back end. And we sort of approach this project as having 3 layers: the data, the API, and the display. And across our organization, we had already, for a while, been sort of going towards standardizing for the display end using the Drupal CMS. So we went out and looked for, among other things, but one thing we were focused on was Drupal as a calendar system. And we found some others that had built using Drupal. Most of them used it for all 3 layers, though. But we had some problems with this approach. We knew that we would be rolling out a new ticketing system within a year or so, and that would also contain event information. We didn't yet know what it would be, but we knew it would not be Drupal. And the Drupal-based calendar systems we saw for multiple venues also used syncing systems to get current data from one site or one display to another. And we really wanted to avoid the issues that brings, delays in updates, orphan data, and just things getting out of sync. And also, even before this project started, we had begun looking at creating an institutional-wide place to store information and serve it up through an API. And we looked at a number of frameworks to support this, and ended up selecting Symfony, in part due to its upcoming use in the Drupal 8 system. So as a nice plus in using this, it also allowed us to get a head start on Drupal 8 development. And it has great tools for building RESTful APIs that would support our future plans. And in the end, the best mix for our needs ended up being Drupal for the display, Symfony for the API, and at this point a simple MySQL database to hold the data until we're able to begin integrating that with our ticketing system and can hopefully replace most of that. And another thing to note, we're using JSON to transfer the data from the API to the displays, and a module called Views JSON Query, which lets us utilize Drupal's View module, so we get access to all the great sorting and display tools that come along with that. And along the way, we had a few challenges. As you heard earlier, we had a very firm deadline, which meant we ended up pushing some of the features that we would like into a second round of development. Finding an efficient process for entering duplicate information for recurring events was a real challenge. So things like tours where the title and description are all the same, it doesn't make sense to have to enter that all over and over and over. So we worked for a while to try and find ways to do that, and we're still looking at ways to make that more efficient. And handling images, dimensions. The images came in sometimes, not the right aspect ratio or orientation, and so that was a challenge that we are still working on, and hopefully at some point the API can help us with that. And in some of our user testing, and even right now, visitors don't always see all of the information that's available for an event, things like additional dates. And then there are also bugs, some we're still dealing with in our admin tool. Handling pagination and special characters can be a challenge. So where we're at today, we have a calendar that works really well. We've had a lot of people say that they like it a lot, so we like to hear that. And we are updating about 200 events 3 times a year. And that's a bulk import process. And then we have a Drupal-based admin tool, which you can see a screenshot here, that our PR and marketing team use to update, and they can add additional events as well, one-offs or small numbers. And some of our future plans, like I mentioned, we want to have images stored in the API so that we can do formatting and other functions with them. Right now, that's all stored at the Drupal, the display level. And we also still have some Drupal 6-based websites that are using aggregated feeds, using RSS instead of JSON, and we're working on migrating those to Drupal 7 and using the JSON feeds. And like I mentioned before, we also have a new ticketing system, so we will be doing some integration with data that is available from there. So that is our calendar. I guess we open up to questions now.
I don't know if you guys rent part of the facilities or have school groups or internal meetings, other calendar type events. Is this just for external facing events, or do you have a version of this for internal stuff?
Just external. Yeah.
Yeah, we have a different system that manages the internal field trip type events.
I was just wondering how you consolidate the two. Like, is that part of your import process? Because I mean, your organization must or should have a master calendar where you know everything that's going on internal versus external. And so I'm just wondering, how do you like consolidate that and reconcile?
Well, we have an internal system that manages, the spaces, meeting spaces, things like that. But this is, I don't know, this goes through PR. So they must, I don't know exactly what their process is, but they must take that into account. But they create a list, a stream of these events that they want to make public.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah.
Could you talk a little bit about your future plans for integrating with your ticketing system?
We really haven't started that much. We've had one or two conversations, so we're figuring that out. But with the API in place, hopefully we won't be able to, we won't have to change anything from that point forward. Our displays will hopefully be reusable, and the way that we're serving and searching data can be somewhat reusable. Just the back end, where it's coming from and how we grab it, can change.
have you chosen the vendor?
Yeah, we're going with Tessitura. Got 3 more minutes. Any more questions? Ryan?
Did you guys do, how did the user testing work out as far as, I know calendars can be incredibly complicated, and what makes sense to you doesn't make sense to the people who need stuff, and you have many different types of constituents. How did you do user testing on the work?
You wanna talk about that, Crystal?
I was to say it's an ongoing process.
It's definitely.
frankly.
Mostly internal, to be honest. With the strict deadline, we didn't have a lot of time for user testing ahead of time. And so we're, definitely we're talking to people and hearing about that right now. And we have some plans over the next couple of weeks to do some more specific user testing with usertesting.com.
Yeah, we've used that on a number of projects before. And it can work pretty well as long as you get the questions very succinct and right that you're trying to figure out.
Could you say more about what usertesting.com is? I'm not familiar with that.
Sure. So you can set up any web page, anything that's publicly accessible as a test, and you can then get just random people sign up for this, and they get paid through the site. And then I think you can give them ratings, so you can tell them whether they're a good reviewer or not, and then you can pick later on.
Right, you create a list of tasks for them to do.
Yeah.
It's all done on their end. It's not back and forth. So, once they start, they just follow the list of the questions that you've already prepared.
Yeah, and you get a recording of their screen, and
They're supposed to
their
talk
audio,
out
and they
loud
talk
while
loud.
they're going through it, so you can get an insight into what they're thinking.
We're done. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot.
Great job.
The old doc.
There you go.
Thank you. All right. Just get this up, and we will be good to go. You two want to come take the stage next? Right. Exactly.
Just line them up.
Right. Oh, there we go. Yep. All right. That. Perfect. All right. Let me just start my timer here. Right, everybody. I'm David McKenzie. I'm the Associate Director for Digital Resources at Ford's Theater. I'm going to talk very briefly about a project that we launched in March for the 150th anniversary of the Lincoln assassination called Remembering Lincoln, a digital collection of responses to his assassination. We should probably shorten that subtitle a little bit. This was from our academic advisory committee. So no surprise, it's a long title. So by the way, if you want to tweet, I'm at DP McKenzie. And want to specify too that I am in the education department at Ford's Theater, because this is the department where this project originated. So what is Remembering Lincoln? Well, Remembering Lincoln is a digital collection of people's responses to the Lincoln assassination. So it's essentially letters, diaries, newspapers, mourning ribbons, lithographs, anything that shows how people responded to the Lincoln assassination when it took place 150 years ago this April. So essentially, our goal behind it was to localize and personalize this abstract national story. It's a national story with a lot of drama. A lot of people are interested in the nitty-gritty details of it. But how did this affect people's lives everywhere around the United States and around the world? So, coordinated by Ford's Theater, we got an IMLS grant for it, so thank you, IMLS. And we have around 30 institutional contributors now. That number keeps growing. We're doing more and more outreach to get primary sources into this collection. Now, one of the big points I always like to make is that Remembering Lincoln is really meant to bring people into primary sources. And because this actually originated from user experience in our physical exhibition. So this is our Center for Education and Leadership, where we have a bit about the funeral train that brought President Lincoln's body from Washington to Springfield, Illinois for burial. Along the funeral path, thousands of people showed up, actually millions of people showed up along the path, and we have a little interactive that shows what happened at the major cities where the train stopped. User testing or audience evaluation showed that people were clicking on their hometowns in this interactive. So my boss had the question, how do we take this story out? How do we take this from the places that are on the funeral train route? So initially the idea was to do an on-site special exhibition that showed some people's responses. But an on-site exhibition, you'd have to do loans. You really could only show so much. We have a tiny special exhibition gallery. So she came up with the idea for doing a website instead. So wrote the IMLS grant, got the IMLS grant. I was hired initially as the project manager. Thankfully, I've been able to stay on. And so really, first and foremost, I realized I used a museum swear jar word right here, engagement. If anybody has a better word, please do let me know. But really the goal for this was not just access and preservation. Very laudable goals, and but the goal was not just to make this an archive for researchers, but something for everybody. Who is everybody? Well, that's the next step. So we brought together an advisory committee, as well as the partners who were on board for the project in November of 2013. Had a 2-day planning meeting. And we came up with 4 different target audiences that we really wanted to aim this toward. Teachers, students, enthusiasts, and scholars. Now, we actually had an audience evaluator on board already. She was somebody who had worked with Colonial Williamsburg, Connie Graft. I'd strongly recommend her. And she was really there to determine, do some of the formative and the front-end evaluation for this project. We also had a plan to bring a digital strategist on board in the spring, but we decided to bring him on board immediately. This turned out to be a really good decision because he and Connie, who had never met before this planning meeting, worked very well together to take audience research and translate it into a digital product. So we did literally user personas that day. We drew out people, gave them profiles, gave them a biography, and then tried to extrapolate, okay, what would they want from such a site? Why would they use it? What would bring them to use it? What uses might they have? How might they use it? So then we took those, made logic models. How many of you have done logic models for projects? Good number. So yeah, so this was essentially taking the outcomes that we had defined for each audience group, short, medium, and long term, and putting in what inputs and outputs we needed to reach that point. So then, all of this so far has been based on assumptions. And you know what happens when you make assumptions. So then we did some audience evaluation. We did focus groups first. So we had a group of teacher representatives that we recruited from different parts of the country. And they were able to really tell us, some of what they needed. For example, more curated materials. I'm a PhD student. I like to go into the raw material, and I like to search through it. Most teachers simply don't have the time. In fact, Minnesota Historical Society gave a great presentation. I think they're giving it this time as well here to really talk about some of how teachers use primary source materials. I learned a lot through that. And people told us, okay, we want, for example, maps, personal stories as a way to get into the site. Then we also did surveys. We managed to get 52 academics, 98 enthusiasts, mainly because an enthusiast blog about the Lincoln assassination posted the link. And so we got a lot of people who are very interested in the Lincoln assassination. And we got 58 teachers to respond to the survey as well. So then something that we did notice, though, as with any group, whenever you're doing audience research, if it's self-selecting, sometimes you'll reach certain conclusions. For example, the enthusiasts, because it was on an enthusiast blog about the Lincoln assassination, people talked about wanting all of the nitty-gritty details of the events around the assassination, which really, our goal institutionally was to move away from some of that into how ordinary people experience this event. So from there, we worked with the digital strategist. He actually brought us and the audience evaluator together to form a product definition document. How many of you have used product definition documents before? Few of you. So yeah, this was something interesting I hadn't really known about. It was essentially a list of specifications. So we made all these statements such as a blank, I want to blank so that I can blank. So for example, as a teacher, I want to create my own subset collection for use with my students. So we formulated this, ran it by some people that we had been working with as well, and then we were ready for the RFP for a web developer. Now I should add that the reason we didn't have a web developer on board was that we had funding for planning, but we didn't actually have funding for execution. So we wound up saving some money from the grant to be able to execute this, knowing that we might not get the money in time because of, as someone put it to me once, the tyranny of an anniversary. We needed to have this launched by April 2015, no matter what. So luckily we managed to save some money, and we found a really good web developer, Mike Tedeschi and Interactive Mechanics back there. Strongly recommend them, to put this together. So this product definition document really wound up driving our platform decision. We chose to build a Drupal site because it would be more customizable to fit some of the specifications of the product definition document. So then Mike and his team went to work. We did some more user testing in February. Luckily, I happened to be speaking to a graduate class at the time, and so used them as my guinea pigs as well. And we formally launched the site on March 18th, 2015, so a bit less than a month before 150th anniversary of the assassination. So, something to specify too, because we did so much of a, focus on the end user, which I think was ultimately a very good thing. Some of the parts of the product definition document we didn't make as explicit. So, for example, realizing that we had a lot of multiple page documents. So we had to actually rebuild some of that functionality in because it didn't come with Drupal, whereas with a system like Omeka, it would. So that's just a piece of advice to really make sure that you include some of the back-end function as well. So then we are doing some post-launch evaluation at the moment. We, of course, like everybody using Google Analytics, we would like to ask at the end about any benchmarks that anybody has for numbers for something like this, because we don't really know. And, you know, as many of you know, boards like numbers. So love some benchmarks. Also, we just ran a couple of focus groups with museum visitors and with teachers as well. So for the most part, they said, okay, you know, we can use this. Some of this is really good, but also they said, you know, for example, some teachers really want to be able to download and print materials. Well, we have a lot of small JPEGs because of the requirements of the web. So figuring some of that out. Also, My Collection. Some users, this is a function where you could click on an item and add it to your own personal collection. Some users said, oh, this is working great. Some users said, not as much. So, you know, we would probably have to add some more instructions for that. Luckily, we have a maintenance plan with interactive mechanics, so we'll be doing some prioritization based on this user evaluation. And also, we'll probably be doing some surveys next as well to really look at how it's working. So that's my presentation. Since I know that so we're in a short time frame here, we have 4 minutes for questions. Questions, anyone? Yes. That was actually, we worked with Connie. Oh, it was she was an audience evaluator. So she actually, that was her really her 2 steps were first doing first being part of the planning meeting, which helped to formulate the logic model, and then we really actually formulated separate ones for each audience. And so that was part of her skill set to do the logic model, and then essentially testing those outcomes and going back to refine them after we did the initial audience testing.
What is your planned lifespan for this site?
It's something that we do plan permanently, and it's a really great question too, because we actually planned for short and long-term audiences. Short term, we realized there would be a big spike around, April 14th, 2015, around the 150th anniversary of the assassination. So that was really meant to be more, for a broader public group, loosely defined, since that's, not really technically an audience, but especially the enthusiast audience. But then we see this as a classroom resource from here on out. So, it's something that we think will hopefully attract some enthusiast interest, but we also know that, like with any anniversary site, there's only a certain amount that, people will come to. So a certain number of people will come to it. So we're really seeing this as a long-term teaching resource as a way for teachers in particular, say here in Minnesota, to say, not only here's what happened in Washington, but hey, here's how people like you in Minnesota dealt with this event. Sure.
How did the way your audience responses, how is that reflected in your structure of how the collections laid out?
It's a great question. So the product definition document really helped to define that. And see, as far as specifics, for example, people said, we want a map to be able to access the collection. We want to know people's stories. We want a timeline of events to really help to put these responses into context. So we did all of those. Also, that it helped to really figure out what people could sort by, what people could search by. Time? All right. Well, I'm around, so feel free to ask any other questions.
Hello, can you hear me? I see some people in the back of the room. Please feel free to come in the front because there are some seats here. So my name is Anna, and I'm delighted to be here today. And I'm going to talk about some spatial facility things today. I'm a third-year PhD student at the University of Leicester, the United Kingdom. Actually, I'm from Russia, from St. Petersburg. And my research is focused on spatial facility management and its role and history within museum sector. Of course, it's not new to manage buildings. We've been doing that for centuries. However, it's still quite new to historicize this practice and try to learn from the previous experience. And this is what I'm trying to do in my research. I strongly believe that, and this is the point of my presentation, that before implementing any universal or standard principles of any management, you have to study your particular institution as much as possible. And in case of my research, to study the building, to understand how it operates, how it was evolved during its history, and how people before you actually managed it, and learn from their experience, because sometimes there might be answers, sometimes there might be failures that can help you to deal with the current situation. So now to my case study. I'm sure that you recognize the Red Square, its iconic monuments, the St. Basil's Cathedral, the Mausoleum, the Kremlin. On the other side of the square there is GUM, the most famous shopping center in Russia. However, there is one more building on this square, and if we take a look on Instagram feed and geotag the Red Square, we see a lot of pictures of this kind. And when I was actually at the Red Square, I can hear people saying, "Please take a picture of me near this." Is that red brick building a part of the Kremlin? Maybe it's Kremlin storage, or is it a gingerbread house? So you can see now the Red Square from another angle and see this red building on the left-hand side. So actually, first of all, this is the museum. This is the Museum of the Russian History, which covers the period from the ancient times to the late 19th century. And actually, it's the biggest museum in the world in terms of collections. It has 5 million of objects. It's even bigger than the Hermitage that has just 3 million. Yes, and most of these objects are stored in the middle of the capital of Russia. That's quite surprising. And you can see the variety of objects we have. So it's armory, paintings, clothes, some archaeological stuff, gold, etc. So how did this happen, that the biggest museum in the world, at least in terms of collection, which has so beautiful building, still remains something like take a picture near this? And if we look back at the spatial history of this museum, we can learn some lessons, and I'd like to share some of them with you today. So actually this museum was founded in 1872, and as you understand, the special building was designed to host and display these collections. You can see the original drawing of the architect and the result. And museum founders were really keen on interiors, and they paid a special attention to interior decoration. So they would like to each of 40 halls to be decorated in a special way to recreate the atmosphere of a certain historical period. So they tried to decorate floors, ceilings, all the walls, doorways, etc. Unfortunately, before the revolution of 1917, just 20 of these halls were completed. And here are just some pictures which were taken before the revolution. This is what visitors saw when they came to the museum from the Red Square. So the main entrance used to be from the Red Square. And of course, this is the Museum of History. And this means that when it comes to the history as subject, nobody can be sure how the current political system will react and how it will present the history. So this is what happened with the museum. During the Soviet period, some of the interiors were reconstructed, sometimes destroyed, in order to give space for new ideology. And this is what happened with the entrance zone. So they put new decoration, some of the interiors were destroyed. And what I'd like to talk about is the period of the 1980s, when the museum was closed for the renovation. In the 1960s, the building itself was assigned to be a monument, so it got official protecting status. And during this renovation of the 1980s, museum administration decided that from this period of time, the building itself and its interiors should be physically protected. And the building became itself an art object. And actually, this brings a lot of issues to us nowadays. Unfortunately, the main entrance since that time was closed. And how can we open the museum, which still is a kind of invisible gem on the square, to the public? We use some digital and analog techniques, and I would like to share them with you now. So this is how the entrance zone looks nowadays. Sometimes it is used for some public events, and it looks like, from my point of view, quite weird because I don't want to comment, but you can see. Sometimes official events take place in this part. And what we can see from at least Instagram is that people pay attention to the interiors. And we see a lot of pictures of this entrance zone, of the ceiling decoration, etc. So we realized that we need to provide our visitors and users with more information. We see that they pay attention. So what did we do? We ran a quiz on Facebook and the Russian social network. We published parts of the interior details, and people had to decide in which hall these details are located. And those who gave right answers got some prizes from us. We invited Instagram bloggers to run Empty Project, which is quite famous in the museum sector right now. So they ran a creative photo set in the museum, which brought us 300 new followers on Instagram. We try to pay attention for details and explain some of the hidden gems in the museum, like this figure. We also do this thing. Put some posters on the permanent exhibition, inviting people to share their pictures and stories using museum hashtags. So in case of this sculpture, it worked really well. It's a modern art, and it's really cool to take selfies with this figure. So we put information that please take selfie, and there is actually a museum selfie hashtag, which is really popular. And we get some results. People use museum hashtag and museum selfie hashtag and publish pictures on Instagram. This is the failure. This particular treasure doesn't get any attention. I think that we were wrong with the text on this poster, so it's time for us to rethink the content of this particular poster. We also started a blog about museum architecture worldwide to familiarize people with the buildings internationally, to let them think about buildings not just as collections, but also containers for these collections. We published a book on museum architecture and interiors for those who like some analog stuff, traditional stuff. And what's next? The quality of this picture is really bad, I know. But this is what people actually see when they come to one of our halls. Due to current exhibition design, original paintings cannot be seen. So what we'd like to do is, by using high quality pictures, to create an audio tour using free platform Easy Travel. You might hear about it during this conference, and try to provide our visitors and users with some really basic information about what does these particular details mean, how can they be explained, to tell some stories that were revealed during my research. At this point of time, we are not looking to segment audience. We try to provide basic information. And later, if we see that people are interested in this content, we might do something more specific for different types of audiences. So what did we learn from this experience? That it's a good idea to learn from your institutional history, look back, look at how the institution was evolved, and pay attention to your facility in building, because sometimes it can provide you with some inspiration, ideas, and even content for your future publications and digital content. Thank you for your attention, and we have 5 minutes for questions. Thank you. Can you please use mic?
I have a I have a question about the one that you considered a fail.
Mhm.
It looked, just from the image that you showed, it looked like it was maybe behind a pillar. And I just wondered if you know from the way people walk through that space if it's maybe not in an
They
optimal
actually
space.
stop near this showcase, but I think the text we put on this poster wasn't really engaging. It just said that it's one of the most famous treasures of this period. Okay. What I'm thinking about is to bring more context and maybe say that at the same time in Egypt, pharaohs did stuff, and this treasure is from the same period. So play with that. Okay, I saw that there was a question, no?
Is the museum open now?
Yes, the museum was opened in 1997, and since that time we try to grow our audience. So in the Soviet time we get up to 2 million per year. Now it's less than million or million a year. So we can do much more. But because it's on the Red Square, it brings a lot of issues. For example, sometimes the square can be closed for some political or social events, and that means that museum has to be closed. And we can't do anything with that, just to follow the mainstream. Of course, maybe the most easiest way for us to bring more people is to just open the door. But due to conservation requirements, we can't just open the door. We need to preserve physically these interiors, and maybe one day we decide to at least open it in some days per week or for some hours. Now it happens just for some really special occasions, for really important guests.
The door is permanently closed?
This main entrance, yes, so we use the entrance on the side of the building. And this brings us a challenge to say people that, yes, this is actually the entrance to the museum. That's difficult. 2 more minutes. Yes,
Thank you. I'm curious, who penetrates and walks around the building to the doors? Is it mainly tourists? Are they school groups or teens coming in to do museum selfies? Who's really your largest demographic? Is it local people or people who work in the area or tourists?
School groups.
Wonderful.
Or organized tourist groups, now mainly from China.
Maybe those groups themselves could be exactly what drives people to go to the entrance. For instance, if they had a doorway with LED lights that was responsive to people walking through it, that lit up, that became visibly sensational to be a selfie wall itself. That visitors coming could light up the entrance and become its own solution. So it's exciting that you're looking at your challenges to bring in new audiences.
Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you. I think it's time for me to stop talking and give place to our final speaker for today's session. Thank you.
Hello, everybody. Just real quick conference note. Not everybody knows, but at the session level on SCED on your phone, you can give feedback. So everybody who's up here, all the past sessions you've seen, if you want to hit that feedback button and give people some feedback, know that that's there. It's helpful.
Aye, the pressure.
Hi, I'm Deb Verhoff, and I work at the Watermill Center. The Watermill Center is not a museum. We are a place for art production, but we have a serious art collection, and so therefore it comes with serious art information needs. My role is to design information systems, including the art collection management piece, but I also oversee the archive of our founding artist, and who is Robert Wilson, and the archives of the place, which is about a 20-year history of people making creative projects. So first I will talk to you about the place very quickly, and then I will talk more about my unique position, I think interesting for people doing cataloging in the room, which is to describe and relate a collection of objects and things with a situational site, artworks and concepts that are much less tangible. Yeah. Yep. Yep. Why? Here it is. Okay, I did it. Sorry, thank you. So this is where I work. The Watermill Center is on the east end of Long Island, and it was founded in the mid-90s. It's an artist residency center primarily, and so what that means, you're looking at a live workspace, in fact. Our mission is to support primarily emerging artists, and in the summer we host an international program where we live and work together for 2 months with 75 invited artists, collaborators. We're about 105 people who are at this location doing production primarily. During the rest of the year, we select artists in residence for a much quieter retreat, kind of a traditional artist residency program. We also have education and public events, but not as many. This is our founding director, our current artistic director and the founder of the Watermill Center. He's an American artist, Robert Wilson, trained as an architect. He gets credit for the design of the building that you saw, and he is working primarily in theater. He's a visual artist, and his contribution or place in the 20th century avant-garde is really about staging, light design, and visual approach to opera. His project at the Watermill Center, I think, might one day be seen as his longest-running production. It's definitely an installation art piece in my thinking of it, and that's because in addition to collecting people from all over the world, he's collecting art and artifacts, and the majority of his collection is on view at the Watermill Center. This is a view of our main studio, and so you see a sample here, a small sample of what's truly a global collection. Our pieces range from 5000 BC up until the present. In this shot, I know you all come from different institutions. You might recognize the Cubist and Modern Chair, Pio poles from Flores, Yipwan figure from Papua New Guinea, and on the Alaskan fishing stool. On the back wall is a piece 2015 that was commissioned and installed by Daniel Arsham. But this is not a gallery, but maybe it is. So the space here is our biggest space. It's used by the artist in residence and for our exhibition, education programs, when we host big events. So every space we have operates in this way with this tension really between being a formal gallery, but also a place where people truly are creating. So they're living and working in that context. And here's a view of the same space. It's from 2008. Jonathan Mesa was the invited artist here. And it's an extreme example, but I think that it illustrates something that happens all the time in our building, in our site, which is that we set a very formal structure, but within that structure, anything can change. And anything seems to be possible. Despite the formality of this place, we really view Watermill Center as a site for exploration. We borrow language from science lab because we talk about research, investigation, and it's highly collaborative. At the same time, we think about our art collection on site as an active and living collection, and it necessarily becomes part of these explorations and conversations. So we're living inside a curated experience, but we're living inside there. And often there's a surprise in how things appear as you walk through the space. And here's another view of a larger view of the bulk of our collection. And these objects are available to the artist in residence for inspiration. They're immediately available. And so quickly, because I don't have enough time to really even give the artist credit or talk about their projects, I will tease you by just showing you quickly a few slides of recent artists that we've hosted. And these are people, they're not required to engage with the collection, but these are people who chose to. Generally here with us, rather, at the Watermill Center for about a month residency. Oliver Beers from the UK. I will say something about this because it's fabulous. The vessels, you might know if you're musicians, every room, every container, every vessel is resonating at a certain tone. So the 4 pieces, remarkably different vessels that he found after listening to everything in our collection are together creating a chord, which is the Devil's Chord, which was banned for you music history freaks out there. It's kind of fascinating. Another artist from the UAE, a Spanish artist, Israeli artist, and her performance group. That is a Judd table. I gave them permission. An education group. And Robert Wilson's work. He is constantly inspired by the collection. He's the main curator. He also is often, or has many times, been invited to create an exhibition as a work of art. In 2013, he was the invitational artist at the Louvre, and he had carte blanche to do what he'd like, and he chose to recreate the Watermill Center inside La Chapelle Room. So it's one view of a much larger installation. So now I've set the context for where I work, and here's where my role comes in. We sent almost 1,000 of our favorite objects to a real bureaucratic museum in Europe. And at this point, our organization is still quite small. There's about 12 people producing everything and working with these artists and managing Bob. So we don't have a registrar. And at this time, when this event happened, we did not have a database, a functioning database about our collection. When I started, there were 7 different data points that have been started and stopped over 30 years. We have about 8,000 objects, but I can't tell you until I complete the inventory. And that's not inclusive of his archive and his artworks. This is the collected collection of things that we live with. So there's one example of a real world museum level challenge in a place that's thinking constantly about production, not about the things that you all are staffed up and tasked with. So for several years, they've been planning a physical expansion of the Watermill Center. It probably will no longer be underground entirely, but this is one render of it. And at some point, Robert Wilson started to express his expansion of the Watermill Center as a library for inspiration. And so that's where I joined the team full time. We have a current library at the Watermill Center, and there's, in my observations, very little separation between what happens in that space and what happens in these other type spaces that I've already described to you. When I started to look around for evidence of research that happens there, I really couldn't decide anymore where does the studio end and what's the formal program that I would call a library. So the first step for my planning information systems and for thinking conceptually about a library was really to identify our collections. Wow, that looks better on my screen. So we have several, but I'll tell you what they are as we go. And on a site of production, there wasn't really a consistent point of ownership over this, nor was the group concerned with production really articulating the needs of collection management. I'll have to go a little faster. We have books. And then, of course, the huge and important collection in my purview is the Robert Wilson Archive. We're underway now with a 5-year processing plan. His materials span 7 decades. He is still alive and working. It's really a history in one important way. It's a history of 20th and 21st century theater. So it spans all these decades, right? So look at my formats. This, is the most fragile among them. We also have a growing history of the Watermill Center. Again, 20 years of art production, and a lot of that is recorded in documentation. I have 5 minutes, oh my God. Okay, so I started to look at how people do artistic research. It's fascinating. And of course, the documentation of these artists also comes into this universe. And I was sketching out, how is this happening with the artist? How is this engagement with an object and with archive material and book material? How does that feed back into the creation of work? So that's really the creative part I got excited about. But I do want to jump and tell you about the information problem, because I think that's something that you can more easily relate to. So here we are. We have the Watermill activities, and then that's us preparing research and staging for Bob's version of Krapp's Last Tape, but then we get the materials back from the theater. So we have a lot in addition to the collection of objects to manage. And in order to plan for that, to track these relational concepts, we worked with consultants on a needs assessment, one of whom is here. And the focus was on functions and procedures, yes, because again, we hadn't thought about that, but also the metadata and the crosswalks. And they recommended systems for us to look at and consider for each of these unique collections. We chose Collection Space, which is an open source cataloging tool, and had several criteria for that selection, which includes a high level consideration was that it has an open API interface, and we have plans for mixed use of this data. It's also a little bit more robust than some of the others we looked at. And more importantly, we really like the idea of contributing back to the code and being part of a community of users that are developing this software. So we've already given some feedback. We decided just to migrate the data that we prepared for the exhibition at the Louvre, because it was the only clean, clear set of data that we have to work with. For the digital asset piece, we selected Piction, a commercial product, and again, we had criteria for technical performance, interoperability, but what impressed us the most was its capacity to manage robust metadata. So we're in the process of production all of the time, and so we have to manage rights and approvals and granular level access. So that's distribution. I know you guys do that too in museums, but we're also ingesting those things I showed you that are coming back from theaters. And so we have to have workflows that will allow us to manage all of that stuff coming in and out that's not our email, or whatever. So those were some of the reasons. And of course, we have many images that document our collection objects. And so those two systems need to talk to one another. We're benefiting greatly. UC Berkeley is a lead developer with Collection Space, the home organization, and they have also chosen Piction, so we benefit from their work in developing that tool. And then most interesting for you who deal with the data side of the house, this is one work by Robert Wilson in my purview, and just showing you the different collections that it touches. The art collection, the Mapplethorpe image of the creators, the object that inspired the costume design, and in fact the whole opera. And then I have this drawing on the bottom, which is from the archive. So his archive has production files. If you're an archivist in the room, you know that we're not treating those at an object level. But as soon as it leaves the house and goes on exhibition, which it does, then I automatically elevate it to be object and have to deal with all of those procedures. And here's a more nitty-gritty list, and this is kind of the moral of the story. This is sort of my recent breakthrough, so I'm going to end with this. But it's probably something that you're facing if you're dealing with the high-level kind of ecosystem of what's going on with your data sets. So again, I have the luxury and the daunting task of starting from scratch, and on the right you see all of the things. I have lists and lists, but this is like the thing stuff that I'm organizing and responsible for, and the digital collections land over there because they're objects, right? As soon as they're objects, and as soon as you think about them that way, they get treated differently. Over here, on the left, I have the terms. Okay, I have concepts, and I've got a loose guide that we're using based on the Getty thesaurus. I have my local terms. I also have a real great opportunity in here for open link data, because I'll necessarily be cataloging the major theater houses and venues in Europe. So, and the people who have been on those stages. But one area that took a really long time to sort out in terms of terms and concepts was this business here, which is Robert Wilson's works. It's not a thing. And also the events, all of these event-based non-object stuff. And so how do I deal with it? I could put it as a running, I only have a few minutes, I won't be able to ask any questions, but it's a good breakthrough. I think it's worth it. So anyway, I could have it as an authority file, but really with the help of Megan Forbes, who's attached to Collection Space, we've really thought about putting the works into Collection Space as works, in part to associate our object collections, but also because I still need a record of every performance. As soon as I get into cataloging those digital objects, I need to know what stage is it, what city is it, who's in the photo. And I know that archivists face this when they digitize. So we think we're going to use the exhibition loan procedure because that's been fed back by the community. Again, that's the great part about a developing product with open source. And we're just going to use it to store all of my theater performance work because an exhibition is an event-based thing. The Watermill Center events, they're not finished works. I just told you it's process, and it's not even right to think about them as works. And then we have everything that you guys have, the lectures and the public screenings and things like that. So I'm actually now decided to, because of that capacity in Piction, I've decided that I'm going to be tracking all of that data. And because we're looking at a new website, I'm hoping that that can serve as some level of content management for the new site. So this is my least visual, my last and my most geeky slide, but it's showing the different collections, the data structure for Piction and what I'll be loading in. And when I plotted them all next to each other, I realized, oh no, they really do have a lot of common ground. The next step is, of course, to develop the interface layer. Anyway, that's a whole other presentation. I don't know what it's going to look like, but I'm starting all of this. My first in true life is as an artist and a creative designer, so I don't know, and I'm okay with that, what the end result is going to be. But I know that we need to see all of our assets, and we have to have tools to be able to relate and group them. And my real want, of course, in a site of production is to invite the people who are there to contribute to that activity. I'm sorry I cheated you out of your time to ask me about it. Thank you.